Thank you, and thank you for coming before the committee, and thank you for your work at GAO. I'd like to go to the two recommendations that you mentioned in your statement. You mentioned for EPA to develop and implement an asset management framework for national ambient air quality monitoring systems, and secondly, for EPA to develop and make public an air quality monitoring modernization plan. You addressed this a little bit. I'm wondering, what has EPA done? Your study came out in two years ago. In the last 2 years to implement your recommendations.
Yes, thank you for that question, Senator Capito. So we do follow up with our recommendations. First of all, EPA agreed with those recommendations.
Right.
They have been meeting and working with their local and state partners. They have plans already in place to develop an asset management framework, which we think would be really useful, as that would allow them to focus their limited resources on the highest priorities. We understand at the upcoming conference that EPA is having next month on air quality monitoring in Pittsburgh, our report and our recommendations are part of the discussion as they partner with state and local folks to figure out the bigger job of a modernization plan. So we are touching base with them and following up. So we're hopeful that those recommendations will be implemented as well.
Yeah, let me ask you a question on the modernization plan. Let me ask first about the funding issue. It was 20% down funding since 2004, adjusted for inflation. Is that real dollars down, or is that? I don't have the figures in front of me. Has the amount gone up? It just hasn't gone up as much to keep with inflation, or how does that?
Sure. So when we did the report in 2020, we looked back 15 years.
Yes.
And so what we found was that for that time period, there was a decrease in funding of 20%. While controlling for inflation. We can also submit for the record the more details about those numbers.
Okay. So I guess what I'm wondering is, why do you think EPA, with knowing that, you cited some of the real physical problems, lack of air conditioning and things of that nature, why do you think they haven't already moved to a modernization where you can have low-cost monitoring, you can reshape? Do you think it's a bureaucracy that's, kind of immovable, or you like to do it the way it's always been and think it's accurate? Are states resisting? Where do you think the real problems are with why they haven't already moved to a modernization plan 10 years ago?
I think it's a variety of issues. So this is an aging infrastructure. It's a fairly complex. There are many different networks. You can look at our statement and our report where there are thousands of monitors across the country. Now, EPA has been working with its local and state partners, especially as they're looking at these low-cost sensors to figure out where they can be deployed, what the particular uses of them could be. We just didn't see an overall plan where they're really focusing on this aging infrastructure and really coming up with ways to modernize it.
Right.
And so, and again, they're supportive. They're moving in that direction. So we're hopeful to see that come about.
Well, yeah, I would hope sooner. You mentioned it, and I just caught what you said in your opening statement. I went back and tried to find it, but I couldn't find it. You said something about an incomplete list as to what is more toxic than. Can you go back to your statement and read that?
So let's see. If it was about air toxics.
Yeah, and you started. I do have quotes on here about an incomplete list.
With air toxics, it was more that EPA needs to better understand the hot spots, like cancer clusters. Right. It could also help promote environmental justice by highlighting where the pollutants are concentrated. So essentially, there's just a need for additional information when it comes to air toxics, like more local scale information about where those hot spots are, and then also the timing information in real time. So
maybe I was thinking what you were saying is that local and state authorities working with the EPA don't have a clear view of what's the most toxic or what's the toxicity level of certain things. That's not what you're saying.
No, I mean,
Okay.
there are already 188, I believe, air toxics that have been identified. Right, it's more the measurement of these toxics
Okay.
in particular locations that's needed.
Okay, I heard that wrong because I thought what you were saying was that the EPA hasn't provided the data to the local and states to say this type of toxin is more critical or should be more monitored more.
So that is one of the challenges of
Yeah, that was the incomplete
prioritizing
list.
air toxics, right? There's a need for EPA to figure out which air toxics need priority because of a lack of information. So that's why we're saying there's information that's needed so that the agency can begin to prioritize which air toxics they should monitor.
Yeah, it would seem to me that would be a critical responsibility for
Yes.
the EPA, and in my view, should already be pretty apparent with all of the science and data that they generate. Let me ask you if you can explain in really general terms, because I know you're a technical expert, the difference between monitors that are used to regulate criteria for air pollutants and then air toxics. Is there a difference there?
Certainly. So for criteria pollutants, they're largely the combustion products for things like vehicle use and burning coal. We're interested in short-term exposure, so we have monitors that give us time resolution of a few seconds or a few minutes. For air toxics, we're often interested in lifetime exposure because of the potential for them being cancer-causing. And in those cases, we don't need that same time resolution, but we need to get very, very sensitive results. So as a previous witness pointed out, we may be collecting a sample and shipping it off to a lab and getting the answer back in a matter of weeks rather than instantaneously.
So, we've heard testimony that there are gaps in some of these bills are aimed at trying to fill gaps. Would you describe, you mentioned enormous amounts of data that EPA is generating or collects, and then we're hearing all these gaps. I'm curious to know, why did EPA stop publishing the data in 2016 that we could, you could extrapolate for regular people like me to be able to see what's going on rather than to have to dig deep? And what gaps would you say there are in light of the testimony that you've heard before you?
I can't speak to EPA's.
You don't know?
I don't know.
Okay.
In terms of gaps, there are emerging pollutants, and the
What would be an example of an emerging pollutant?
well, PFAS is one, but also some of the things that were listed in Senator Duckworth's bill, ethylene oxide, formaldehyde.
Right.
And one of the issues is that the methods that we use to look at things around a refinery aren't good tools for those chemicals. And each of those chemicals presents some challenges from an analytical chemistry standpoint, and we wind up needing to spend a lot of money and effort to get data for one chemical at a time, as opposed to some of the existing methods that allow us to look at dozens or hundreds of chemicals with a single sample.
Okay. All right. Mr. Isaac, I want to ask you about the Permian Basin, because domestic air emissions, including ground level ozone, have fallen significantly over the past few decades, meaning our country has much cleaner air. But that has not stopped this administration from moving forward with plans to redesignate your area, the Permian Basin, as being in non-containment with the ozone standards. How would a finding of non-attainment with the ozone standard impact what goes on in the Permian Basin, and how do you interpret that, their interpretation?
Well, and their interpretation is wrong. The EPA non-attainment areas should be based on vehicular traffic, and they're looking at remote areas where there is no vehicular traffic. And you're looking at one of the largest areas of production for oil and gas in this country. And so it would be absolutely catastrophic to put the EPA in non-attainment. And that's why our Governor Abbott, has come out full throttled against this and will work diligently to make sure that this is not implemented over the Permian Basin, whether it's Texas or New Mexico. But that energy that we are producing is is really providing the fuel for this country and the rest of the world. And quite honestly, we need to be increasing production. We need to get the financial industry off of the backs of the oil and gas companies and the fossil fuel producers in this country. We need to get them to quit discriminating against responsible American energy producers. We need to get the government to get out of the way and get off the backs of these responsible energy producers so that we can be helping people that are facing troubles in Sri Lanka and Germany and France and the Netherlands and Ghana and South Africa that are just being crushed by energy poverty because they've adopted these policies to decarbonize their governments, their countries, which does nothing to improve the environment, but does everything to increase the cost of energy. So it's just another assault on the oil and gas industry.
Thank you. We've heard that, and we've stated, both of us, and you all have as well, that the mercury levels have come way down over the last 20 to 30 years. Consistent with everybody's testimony is that the reason that we have any issues with this, I wouldn't say any, but issues with this is because of what goes on in China. So I'm curious to know, does China monitor their mercury emissions? Mr. Eklund, do you know?
No, I don't know, but I would be surprised if they do.
Yeah, do you know?
I do know they have the pollution control technology. They just don't utilize it. And I have often said that there are, of all the technology the Chinese steal from us, it would be nice if they would utilize our pollution control technology. They don't. We're world leaders in clean air, and that impacts, as I said in our testimony, over 80% of the mercury deposits in the U.S. today come from foreign sources, and over half of that is from Asia.
Thank you.